Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good to see everyone out this morning. We have those who are online with us also. We're in the book of John, chapter 10. Began that study of chapter 10 here a few weeks ago. We'll continue that study. John, chapter 10. Last week we began with the beginning of the chapter and talked about what it means to be a shepherd. Jesus uses this as a parable to explain to those that are there what it means to be a good shepherd. And he uses this to compare those that were there, what it means to be a bad shepherd. And so we had a good discussion, I think, last week about those things. We, I believe, got down to about, around verse 5, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll begin there. John chapter 10 and verse 5. We'll look at, I think we're going to read down through verse 10. So let's do that. If I could get a volunteer to read 5 through 10. John chapter 10, verses 5 through 10. Okay, David, please.
But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full.
Okay, thanks, Dave. All right, so as we talked last week, we even looked at Psalms chapter 23, the 23rd Psalm. We looked at the what David had written concerning being a shepherd and what the shepherd's responsibilities were and how we relate that to Jesus being our shepherd. We also talked about the fact that Jesus uses this as a parable. Parable, as we've said many, many times, is uses something that's familiar with them, even with us, but with them specifically, to teach a heavenly point. In other words, to bring home a message that he is trying to help them to understand. And he uses the shepherd and the sheep pen and so on to kind of emphasize the fact of what he had been saying, that he is the Son of God. Some of the things we also noticed there, that when we're talking about the way that sheep are led out of the pen versus driven. A shepherd that the sheep recognize his voice. In other words, there were many sheep that were kept into the pen, as we discussed that. That they would recognize the voice of the shepherd, even though there were many flocks in the sheep pen. They would recognize that individual's voice. Okay, they would know whenever the shepherd was there that they would follow him when he would call to them. And so what he is saying here is that basically that Jesus, being the good shepherd, leads the followers, the flock, those who will listen to his voice and know his voice, will recognize his voice and follow him. But it says here too, as Dave just read for us here, that they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from a stranger's voice. Many of us are pet owners, right? We're cat people, okay? We've got a couple cats. I know many of you have dogs and may even have, well, I know that some of them have horses and various things like that. When you kind of compare to what Jesus is saying here with being a pet owner yourself, most of the time, pets recognize our voice, but I know in our situation, like our cats, they're very skittish. And whenever a stranger or someone that they don't recognize comes to the house or whatever, they take off. They hide. And so they don't recognize. They don't recognize. Same thing, I think, with some dogs and with other animals. They recognize the owner, but then they don't recognize people who they're associated with or recognize.
Chester didn't run, did he?
No. Kim and we were visiting yesterday, and Chet, their schnauzer, I believe, right? I don't know what happened. I don't know what I've done to upset Chet. Because Chet and I had a great relationship prior to the pandemic. I don't know what happened there, I don't know if we can blame everything on the pandemic. But no, I'd go over to you guys' house, and he would come up, and, you know, it was like, I'm cousin Dan, because Joyce's brother's name's Danny, and that's brother Dan. But I'm cousin Dan to Chet, and boy, over the last several visits, Chet doesn't like cousin Dan, you know. But no, that is the way pets are sometimes, you know. But the thing is that, and I say all this is to say that we can kind of relate to that, those who have pet owners, that are pet owners. Some of you may, I think, you know, like Stan and Wilma, they have horses. And I would assume that horses recognize, and they come to you whenever you're calling them or coming to feed them or whatever, so they recognize you, don't they? They probably don't have much to do with somebody they don't recognize.
They don't recognize me as well.
They don't recognize you as well, okay. All right. Well, blows my whole theory then, so.
They do stand though.
Yeah, they do stand, okay. Well, he's the good shepherd. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything, Mama. I'm just saying, you know, if we're using this as an example. Well, our cats are the same way. Boy, if you're going to feed the cats, and you're going to do all the other things that go along with cats and various other things, yeah, they recognize you because they know it's time to eat, and you know, so you're the good guy. But I don't know where I was going with this. So anyway, the shepherds themselves are very important, and they were very important to the sheep because they kept protection, they got fed, they made sure that they were safe. And that's what Jesus is using. He's using this as an analogy so that the people would hopefully understand what he was all about, okay? Him calling himself the shepherd. Well, actually, does it actually call himself the shepherd in these first 10 verses or so? We notice that he doesn't say that until he really gets down into verse 7, and then he kind of brings that home. But, so, strangers don't hear the voice, they don't recognize a stranger's voice, and he says here, John says here in verse 6, Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. You know, a lot of times that's what happened when Jesus would teach in parables, even though he was talking about something that they should be familiar with. You know, we talk about the parable of the sower, you know, sowing the seed. We talk about, obviously, the shepherd here. But there were times that the people didn't understand what he was talking about, and this is one of the times here that it says that they did not understand what he was telling them. Sometimes Jesus then would explain, put it into more simpler terms, or just be more frank and upfront with them about what he was talking about. And this is one of the instances here, because it says in verse 7, therefore Jesus said again, I tell you the truth. Okay? In other words, not to get off on a tangent here, but what we talked, Deb and I were just talking yesterday about the truth. Isn't it great if you could find out what the truth is about everything? If you knew what the truth is. You know, I remember Pilate telling Jesus, or when Jesus was confronted with Pilate, and Jesus, I'm just paraphrasing here, Jesus mentioned something about the truth, and Pilate asked him, what is truth? And you know, when we think about that today, you know, in all that's going on, don't you wish that somebody would just be truthful? But how do we determine what the truth is? What is the basis for truth? What determines truth? Evidence. Facts. Facts-based equals the truth. Now, sometimes things change. You know, what we think is the truth because of facts that we have found that may change in some regard, but it has to be based on evidence, based on facts. And so Jesus is saying here, I tell you the truth. What facts, what basis did Jesus have to say that? What had he done that should make them believe that he is telling them the truth?
The miracles he's done.
The miracles. And he had performed many miracles, and he will yet even perform even one of the greatest miracles here in the next chapter or so. But yeah, you know, and he does tell them that toward the latter part of this discussion. But that's where Jesus, he had the truth on his side because he proved it. He had evidence that he was the Son of God. And some of them recognized that, as we'll see as we go on through here. So he said, I tell you the truth, and I want you to notice here something that he says here. I am the gate for the sheep. The word that he used, the two words that he uses here, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. He uses the two words here, on several occasions here, and he will on many occasions throughout the rest of the book. But he uses it here, I am. Where does that come from? Where do we recognize that particular term?
That's God's name, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yahweh?
Yes, I am. Remember when when God had told Moses he was going to go and to deliver the people? That basically just kind of put in a nutshell. He said, I can't speak. I have no, I'm not eloquent in words. What am I going to say? Who am I going to say that sent me? And what does God say? He says that, tell them I am sent you. And that's what they recognized throughout the Jewish history, was that God was known as I am. And I think it's interesting here that this is where Jesus says, I am the gate. And he will say that in a couple of other instances as we look down through here. So, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. Here he uses himself as an entrance. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So to get to Jesus, is there any other way? Is there any other gate, true gate to get to Jesus? There isn't, is there? I mean, we have a lot of different philosophies out there. A lot of different religious teachings about how to get to Jesus and what you have to do. But what the Scripture teaches is that Jesus is the way. He says, I am the gate. I am the way. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. This kind of relates to what we read in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. So we can kind of, if you think about those words and what Jesus is saying here, he said, they will go in and out. I will lead them in. I will lead them out. I don't drive them. I lead them. I lead them in and out, and they will find pasture. In other words, they will find comfort. They will find nourishment. They will find the things that they need. We will find the things that we need, spiritually speaking. But then he goes on to say, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. Okay? Who is the thief? Who are the thieves? Or who is the thief? Who is, let's just say, okay, Satan. The supreme thief. Okay? He's talking about the thief is the chief thief, the main thief, which is Satan, the devil, he does not come to save or to give what they need as far as the individuals are concerned. He comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. Then he compares that to himself, and he says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. That is, that's just totally opposite of what Satan gives. Oh yeah, we might see the benefits, so-called benefits of living a life outside of Christ. The blessings and things that we seem to get, whatever it might be, power, as for instance, we talked about the power and the prestige and all that went along with what the Pharisees, the leaders, had. But is that true? Is that satisfying? Is that, we've all had the experience of being on the outside and being on the inside. And it looks like the blessings and so on that we had at one time was, that was the greatest thing, whatever it might have been. But yet, when we didn't really maybe have the peace, the comfort, the understanding, the relationship, that was all temporary, or it might have been just, very frivolous. So the thing is that Jesus offers something and was offering something to them that they might have life and have it to the fullest. Yeah, Lori?
It's also kind of sobering. My reference refers thieves and robbers in verse 8 back to verse 1, where it says, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, the same as a thief and a robber. And he's talking about the Pharisees at this point, but I think that's also a warning to us. He who comes in by some other way, there is only the one way, and we are exposed so much to people who are trying to get there some other way. I think it's just a warning. There is just one way.
Exactly.
A reminder.
Yeah, exactly. So you're right there. So only one way. And as I said, it's so confusing. The world today. There's any path. What's the word that all roads lead to heaven? Just different ways of getting there, different paths. Well, that's not what Jesus taught here, and it's not what the Scripture bears out. That there is only one way. And so that's what I agree with what you're saying there. Good point. Another thing too, it talks about, just up there, I forgot to mention this, but all who ever came before me were thieves and robbers. In verse 8 there, all who ever came before me were thieves and robbers. There had been those who claimed to be the Messiah, those that claimed to be the deliverer before Jesus. And so, as a matter of fact, we have some reference to that in Acts chapter 5. If you want to turn over there, someone would look up Acts 5, verses 36 and 37. So there were false prophets, there were false teachers, there were false messiahs before Jesus, and that would deliver or try to deliver and deceive those that he was speaking to. Who has that? Acts 5, 36 and 37. I'd like to read that. Okay, Alan, please.
36, 37.
Yes, please.
For before these days rose up Thaddeus, boasting himself to be somebody, to whom a number of men, about 400, joined themselves, who was slain, and all so many of as obeyed him were scattered and brought to naught. After this man rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of the taxing, and drew away much people after him. He also perished, and all, even as many obeyed him, were dispersed.
Okay. I don't know what time frame that Luke is writing here, that he, in Acts 5, what time frame these two individuals, I didn't do any research actually to that, but it sounds like, to me, just sounds like that that they could have been during the time of Jesus or before Jesus. But the fact is that there were many that had come in the name of, of the Messiah, claiming to be from God, that were false prophets and claimed to be the Messiah. So I think just relating that to what Jesus says here, that there were some that had come that tried to deceive or tried to lead others away. So I think it might be a reference possibly to that. Any comments on that? Yeah, Kevin and Alan.
I know, if you, 2 Timothy 4:3 talks about the time that's going to come when they won't endure sound doctrine, but they'll after their own lusts heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And that's, people tend to take things out of context. It's like I think it's the last verse in John 20, when it talks about these things were written, so those who believe might, that's the key word, might, we say. So, people will take that and they say, oh, if you believe, you say, okay, they forget about that word might be. And it might be, that's an implication of obedience.
Yes.
There's things to do.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And so the epistles, they help talk about the time coming.
Good point. Alan, you had
Yeah.
comments?
Well, we went to Acts 5, we read those two verses,
Mhm.
but those two verses is just a lead-in to a really nice speaking of the Pharisees here, or one of the Pharisees, because they were at the time persecuting Paul, and I'm not sure who it was, for speaking of Jesus, teaching Jesus.
Mhm.
And this Pharisee, he stood up. Man, let's see, I can find his name here.
Was it Gamaliel?
Gamaliel,
Mhm.
the doctor of the law, and he said that we take these men and take heed to yourselves. What we intend to do is just touching these men, because they were fixing to do something to them. And he said, let's just wait a minute. And he described these two people that we're talking about, because really, truly, when you sit there and read just them two verses, you say, well, maybe is that somebody was leading a revolt,
Mhm.
Against the Romans or something, But then you read going down, it said, now, he said in 38, it says, now, I said, if ye refrain from these men and let them alone, for the counsel work of men, it will come to naught. But if it be of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest happily you be found even to fight against God. So he said, let these people go. If they're bad, in due time, something will happen to them.
Mhm.
But if they are from God, we don't need to touch them.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a real good chapter right there.
Yeah, very good. I'm glad you brought that up because it does, reinforce the idea
Yeah.
that these were claiming to be, I mean, not necessarily military leaders that were wanting to revolt against Roman rule, but that they were claiming to possibly be spiritual leaders as well, or maybe both.
Yeah.
But we know that there were many groups that were, we talked about the zealots and so on. There were many sects and groups that had wanted to overthrow, and that's what they expected Jesus to be. I mean, or they expected the Messiah to be, not Jesus. They expected the Messiah to be. And they thought Jesus, if he were the Messiah, that's what he was going to do, would overthrow the Roman government, just like they had other kings that had done the same thing, for other over authorities. So, it's a good point. And I think, again, don't know the time frame or whatever, but I think what you're saying in the verses that follow that kind of reinforce the idea that it could have happened during that time or prior to Jesus coming, revealing himself then as the Messiah. So, okay, yes, Brian?
Just another comment, having to do with verse 8 there. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep do not listen to them. I have a reference here for Ezekiel 34, verses 2 and 3. And it's a prophecy about the leadership of Israel. And it says, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, even to the shepherds, thus says the Lord, Ah, shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding yourselves. Should not shepherds feed the sheep? So, obviously, it was to show that those who are leading falsely are benefiting themselves, and not the sheep of Israel, not the people of Israel.
What was 34, and what was the verses, Ryan?
It's supposed to be 2 and 3.
2 and 3. Okay, Ezekiel 34, 2 and 3. Okay. Good.
For verse 2 especially.
Okay. Yeah. So the analogy of shepherds it was used throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament. And again, that's why Jesus would use something like that they would recognize scriptures such as Ezekiel and others that are prophesying about the Good Shepherd. So, yeah, very, very good point. Any, yes, Jeremy?
I did some quick research on who he was actually from 44 to 46 AD. And he had promised that he was going to split the River Jordan. And the procurator at the time found out about it. And he also was claiming to be a prophet. And they ambushed him and killed him.
Okay, and this was which one? Or which person? Thudius, okay? Okay, good. Good. So, around 44 AD. Okay, so after Jesus' life. Okay. All right. Great. All right. Any other comments? Appreciate those. All right. So then we look then as we see verse 11. Well, let's see here. Did we finish up this? The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I come that you might have life and have it to the full. Okay. All right. Let's take a look then from 11 through 16. How about someone volunteer to read 11 through 16? John chapter 10. Thank you.
I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But he that is a hireling and not the shepherd, whose own sheep are not, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf catches them and scatters the sheep. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and cares not for the sheep. I am the good shepherd and know my sheep and am known of mine. As the Father knows me, even so know I the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd.
Okay. Thank you, Kip. All right, so again, what is the term he uses here? Again, it repeats the same thing, doesn't it? I am. Okay, he says, I am the good shepherd. And the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And then he compares it here in verse 12. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. And when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. In other words, he's comparing here someone who is truly committed, to, as he is comparing himself here to the good shepherd, the one who is totally committed to the sheep to the point of giving himself, giving his life. The hired hand, someone who is hired to take care of the sheep, is someone that when trouble happens, when something goes wrong, when the wolves come, or whatever, they're the ones that's going to run the other direction. They're not going to be committed enough, they don't love the sheep enough that they're willing to give their life for the sheep. Just a very stark comparison between the hired hand and the good shepherd. Why, when you think about that, in comparison, like for instance, those of us who have worked for people who own businesses that, like personally have started a business and have passed it on from generation to generation, and then all of a sudden they decide to get out of the business, maybe they sell it to a corporation. I'm just kind of thinking on these terms, I don't know if it's a good comparison. But the people who owned and started the business, they were very committed. I mean, they wanted to make sure that the business succeeded. They were concerned about the reputation. They were concerned about the quality of the product. They were concerned about all these things so that they would be successful and that they would have a good reputation, a good name. But then sometimes, as I say, whether you can pass it on to relatives or whatever, or for some reason they decide that they want to get out of the business and they sell it to someone who is just an owner that maybe has business ventures throughout or whatever. Or a big corporation. I'm not condemning big corporations, but I'm just saying someone who's not totally committed. They're not involved into the day-to-day activities. They're just there from a high regard looking down, but they're not really part of it. The reputation maybe not be as important to them, the quality, whatever.
Looking at the bottom line.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that, and I've worked for companies that have both sides of the fence. And as I said, I worked for a company that was a family-owned business that really was committed to doing a good job. Then I've also worked for a company that was started by a family, and they sold out, and it went to a large corporation. A lot changed in that time, between the commitments, between what the family wanted to happen and what the corporation wanted to happen, and the way they looked at the business. So I relate that to this, Jesus was committed. The hired hands, those such as the Pharisees, Sadducees, they really, the only thing they were committed to was the prestige, honor, power, money, whatever. Kim, I think you have.
It's a matter of taking ownership, having a personal, when a company goes public, you got thousands and thousands of people that have a chunk of it, okay, but you don't have one person having that feeling of ownership and doing what's best for the thing. Like Alan said, it goes for the bottom line. We've seen examples of that here in Boise County. Okay, when that change happens, it might grow, it might be a profit, but some of the personality leaves, some of the confidence leaves, things like that. When they know that an owner is going to sacrifice himself for the company, and it's the same premise that you have here.
Yeah.
You got to take ownership, which is what a shepherd basically is.
Yeah.
He takes ownership, and the sheep love it.
Yeah.
They follow.
They follow.
And that's what we as Christians are doing.
Yeah.
Following Jesus.
Yeah. Jeremy and Dave.
And the one parallel, I guess, that I'm seeing is when the wolves came, when Jesus was sat upon, when they arrested Jesus, the parallel, he's the good shepherd, and apostles were great people. They scattered. They even denied Christ because they were scared. They were not as fully committed at that time as what Jesus was.
Yeah.
I
just babies as far as their maturity level was concerned. And you're right. But then we see as their faith grew, you know, they went to their death, basically, except for John. As far as we know, that's the way that ended for him, is that he lived, but the rest of it ended up being martyred. Dave?
The thing I want to add to Dennis said is that passion, ownership, you have that passion and the drive that the original founder had. And that can get lost easily after it's passed on. And it may not, it may be passed on to the family and they may have that passion. But like in Christ here, Christ came to pass. I mean, that was his role to come here. He loved us.
Yeah.
All the way through.
Yeah. I like what you said, the word passion. You know, that makes a difference in just about everything we do. You know, if we have a passion for our job, you know, if we have a passion for our life as a Christian, I mean, we're going to be more successful in that, and we're going to be able to withstand what life throws at us. But I've heard that, you know, when you talk about generational, we pass even down within the family, sometimes by about the third generation. That original passion, that original concern about that business or whatever is not there as it was with the original and for the family before that, you know. So, and it's not in every case. And I'm not downgrading anyone who works for a corporation, and I'm just saying that I'm just kind of using that as a comparison from personally speaking and seeing those things happen. But it doesn't mean it's the rule, you know. It just means it could be the exception. But we as Christians, I mean, I look at it like this too. When we're talking about whatever our life is, our work life is, to do it wholeheartedly, to, you know, as we're not doing it for the people we work for, we're doing it for Christ. I mean, it talks about that in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 23. You're working for the Lord. Even though you're working for someone, you're working for the Lord. So whatever we do, to the best of our ability, do it as we're doing it for Christ. And it makes a difference in the way people look at, you know, and look at us too. And it can, you know, be beneficial to us both financially and otherwise too. So, good comments. Gift, you have no?
I'm just, as far as the shepherd goes, I was thinking David, you know, and Ryan had that passage from Ezekiel about, you know, and in Ezekiel talks about David being a shepherd too. But when David was a shepherd, in 1 Samuel 17, it talks about a lion came into the fold.
Mm-hmm.
What did he do? He didn't run.
No.
You know, and that's a good example for us as well.
Good point. Al?
Yeah, this is kind of a little bit off the subject, but, you know, we were talking about all the disciples fleeing when Jesus was taken prisoner. John was the only one that was there through all of it.
That's right.
John was also the only apostle that lived to an old age. Now, he had all kind of persecutions,
Mm-hmm.
but it just seems ironic that he stood by Jesus in Jesus' time, and then his life on earth was not, well, I'm not sure how he died, but I'm just saying he didn't die a martyr's death,
Mm-hmm.
being executed. But I did, you know, it's just a weird situation there that, you know, kind of think about it in the back of your mind.
Yeah, he was, we know, he exiled to the island of Patmos, and had the revelation, you know, in the book of Revelation, Jesus appeared. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he lived to an old age, and he is this is the last gospel. The other three gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, had been written. This was John. This is the last and final gospel that was delivered by the Holy Spirit, somewhere in probably, they think, between 80 and 85 AD. So he had something to say, and saying between 90 and 95% of what's in the book of John is not found in the other Gospels. So it's interesting, after all the other Gospels were inspired and written, that he comes along at the latter part of his life and writes the last Gospel. So good point. All good points. Appreciate the comments. Any others? All right, well, first bell. So, so I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep, runs away. The wolf attacks the flock and scatters, the man runs behind, always because of the hired hand, and he cares not for the sheep. Verses 14 through, let's just, if we can, just finish out 14 through 21, and that kind of finishes at least this segment of the chapter 10. We've got more verses after that. But who would like to read 14 through 21? I know Wilma had her hand up a while ago. Okay, Wilma, thank you.
I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. Therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have the power to lay it down. I have the power to take it again. This command I have received from my Father. Therefore, there was a division among the Jews because of these sayings, and many of them said, "He is a demon and is mad. Why do you listen to him?" Others said, these are not the words of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?
Okay, thank you, Wilma. I know that was the second bell. So we'll discuss those verses next week. Appreciate your comments. Thank you.